Hello, I'm Katie Moffat, Head of Digital at the Audience Agency, and in this short webinar, I'm going to talk about how to improve social media effectiveness. First of all, let's be clear about what I mean when I say effective. It can be really easy to find yourself in a holding pattern with social media. You've been doing it for several years, you pretty much view it as another marketing channel. Sometimes it can almost become a tick box exercise. Maybe you're promoting shows, plugging tickets or exhibitions or events. But in reality, the problem is that lots of organisations, when it comes to social media, are shouting into the void. They're not really getting any engagement. Actually, social media, if they're honest, isn't contributing to the overall organisational objectives. And by being effective, it also means that social media is having a demonstrable benefit to the organisation. And that's a bit more than just getting more Twitter followers or a few more likes on a Facebook post. So let's kick off by acknowledging something that's often left unsaid. Social media can be really difficult. To do it well, it's hard. It does require time and focus and creativity. And often it's underestimated how difficult it is to do it well. It isn't just about chucking up things on the internet or leaving it to the intern because they're young and they get digital. The reason so many organisations are not really setting the social media world alight is because it is tricky and it is difficult. And it's actually only getting harder. Why is that? Well, it's because of something that's often called the attention apocalypse. This website provides a snapshot of the volume of content being posted to the internet. Go and have a look at it. I can tell you, it's fascinating and terrifying in equal measures. It's also a useful reminder, though, about the sheer volume of content being uploaded to the internet and social channels, and that it's huge. It's an avalanche of content from millions of different sources. For example, 80 million photos are shared to Instagram every day, 6,000 tweets are sent every second. Every minute on Facebook, 510,000 comments are posted, 293,000 statuses are updated, and 136,000 photos are uploaded. And 400 hours of video is uploaded to YouTube every minute. Recently, Ipsos, the market research company, released their Digital Trends Research Report. And one of their key themes is the difficulty in getting consumers' attention. What does this mean for your organisation? Well, you have to recognise that your target audiences have content coming at them from all angles, and they get to choose. On social media, to a large extent, they construct their own world. And this leads me to the key challenge of the attention apocalypse. It's something you're aware of, I'm sure, but maybe you don't consciously acknowledge it. And that's the nature of this competition. Let's not forget that on social media, your competition isn't really from other organisations. It's from cat pictures, funny memes. It's from skateboarding dogs. It's easy to be dismissive of this kind of content, but the reality of it is your audiences have a choice about what they watch, what appears in their news feeds and what engages them, what makes them laugh. And it's these kinds of things that you're competing against. It's not only about throwaway or silly pieces of content. There's some fantastic, incredible pieces of material that tackle fundamental issues about the human condition, such as the cartoons that Matthew Inman, going under the name of The Oatmeal, produces. The competition on social media is also, importantly, from friends and family, and they're much more important to people than what shows on next at your venue. There's also competition from human interest type Facebook pages and such as Humans of New York, which gets incredible engagement and is really about people and stories and narratives. Then, of course, you have professional journalists producing material that is informing people and educating them. And so when you're posting your content to Facebook or Twitter, it's really important to remember that your posts and your updates appear sandwiched between these other updates. This is the context within which it's seen. People aren't going to your Facebook page or your Twitter account and looking at those pieces of content within the context of your organisation. And what that means then is that with social media, context is everything. Social media isn't like any other channel. For example, your website. When someone comes to your website, they're seeing your content within the context of your organization. When they're on social media, they're seeing your content out of context and within the context of their own lives. So how does being aware of this make us more likely to be effective with our social media activity? So really, there are two pillars to effective social media content. The first pillar is recognizing that social media content is not the same as traditional marketing content. The second pillar is to play to the strength of each platform. And I'm going to go through each of these things in more detail now. So firstly, pillar one, what is good social media content? What does that even mean? And when I talk about content, I should say that in this context, I mean anything that you might post to social media. So videos, photos, links, text updates, anything that you share. So as I say, social media content is very different to marketing content. And that's because, as we've already established, people are seeing it within the context of their world. And so it really has to immediately engage them. It has to jump out at them. It has to give them an immediate response, if you like. So what makes good social content? An academic researcher in the USA a couple of years ago did some research looking into whether there were similarities between types of content that people engage with online, and if there were, what were the sort of general markers of good, effective social content. The first thing they found is that good social content tends to give us an emotional response. We only really share things when they make us feel something. Secondly, informing people, telling them something that they didn't already know, whether that's because it's surprising, interesting, or insightful. Thirdly is humour. Everyone likes to smile and laugh. Humour is quite difficult to do well because if you do it badly, it's pretty awful. And stories. Human beings are hardwired to respond to good stories, and they work very well in a social context. And finally, identity. So often on social media and in a social media context, what people share reflects how they like to be perceived, whether that's to do with being kind, clever, caring, or in some other way reflecting their kind of core values. So the really important thing to understand is that if you are sharing things on social media and it doesn't do any of those things, then in reality, you'll probably find that you'll get little or no response to it. I'd like to talk about an example from outside the arts and culture sector, an organisation, a very small company, but one that tackles or uses social media in a particularly effective way. And that's a company called Hyatt Denim. In terms of what they do, they make handmade jeans for a small company based in Pembrokeshire. And what they do very well is their content ticks the boxes in terms of telling you something new, inspiring you. They share a lot of stories. There's often an emotional response in what they share. And they are very good at that kind of identity aspect. So people who are interested in handmade clothes, really well-made products, the kind of built to last ethos, are very interested in the kind of content that Hyatt Denim share. The other reason that they're interesting is because they always have a very good mix of original and curated content. So it's not that they always talk about themselves. In fact, it's probably the opposite of that. They talk mainly about other things. But what that means is that they are engaging an audience through being interested in what that audience is interested in. So just to come back to the original point, which is to reiterate that when people are seeing content, they're seeing it within the context of their own lives. And so if that content isn't immediately interesting to them, you will find that they won't in any way engage with it. And so what Hyatt Denim does very well is take the time to understand that audience and what that audience is interested in, what engages them, and to share content that basically ticks that box. So a very simple way to think about this approach, to boil it down to its essence, is to use this expression, So to think feed first, what does that mean? It means that whenever you post anything to social media, what you have to think about is how that post will appear, or that tweet or that Instagram post, how it will appear when someone is looking at their feed. So when it's sandwiched in between other updates from other organizations or friends and family, how will it appear? And it's once you think about that, it really helps you to refine the content that you're sharing. So this expression is used. It's an ethos used by Classic FM, and this is a quote from their head of social media there, who says, "Everything we create, share, and do on social media starts with questions like, how will someone react to this in their newsfeed, their timeline? Is it compelling, interesting, unique, entertaining enough? Does this post tell a great standalone story on its own? If that's a yes to all of those things, then we publish it. If not, then we go back to the drawing board." So that actually, that requires quite hard discipline on yourself. It's very easy when we're all time pressed and we're busy and you have things to promote, and social media seems like a really good place to do it. But the reality of it is if you ask yourself the question, do we really truthfully think that this thing that we're about to post on our Facebook page is going to be genuinely interesting? If the answer is no, then you really should think again before publishing it, rather than just doing it for the sake of it because maybe someone will see it. So how might this translate to, let's take, for example, theatres? How might we take that, those ideas about identity and emotional response and so on? So stories, news events about and in your town and region, the people, the audiences coming to theatres are likely to have a connection with a particular area. So anything to do with that area, it doesn't have to always be stories about your organisation. It can be, what interesting, exciting events and so on, kind of going on in the wider geographical area. Human interest stories, maybe to do with actors that are coming into the theatre, or front of house staff, or regular customers. Surprising facts about the theatre, the building, the town. Little kind of nuggets of kind of interesting facts always go down really, really well. And actually, what you can sometimes find is that you will have people within the local area who are, have a very, very detailed historical knowledge, perhaps of your building or venue, and they can be helpful in that respect. Humour is a really good one, as I said, but the caveat is that it does need to be funny. Famously, the Orkney Library Twitter account, which was run just by one guy, the main librarian there, he's left now actually, but he built up a Twitter following of tens of thousands, really purely through kind of the power of gentle humour, all focused around books. I think it's about being creative. It really doesn't have to be all about, in this case, the theatre or what shows you've got going on. In fact, in a way, it will probably have much more impact if it isn't all about the theatre. Again, you've got to think about the context within which people are seeing social media content. It isn't like looking at your website. It isn't like picking up a brochure or a leaflet. It's a very, very different experience. So the second pillar that I mentioned is about maximising the platforms. So what do I mean by that? So within this pillar, I've kind of broke it out into 4 different subsections. So the first is to make the most of specific features. The second being to recognise the different ways audiences on different types of platforms. The third being to think about slightly changing content for different platforms rather than having the same stuff for everything. And if you are really time pressed and there's just you and you're doing everything else, which is not unusual, it is much better to do one thing well than to do lots of things badly. So let's quickly go through each of these kind of subcategories. The first thing I wanted to talk about in relation to my first point, which is making the most of specific features, is thinking about Facebook. And this is really about understanding how Facebook works. And as everybody knows by now, Facebook has what's called a news feed. That's what you see when you log into Facebook as a user. And Facebook are always tweaking the algorithm that decides what appears in that news feed. And quite often, that the result of that means that your posts may not be seen by somebody who likes your page, even if they do like the page. And so what this screenshot is showing you is it's just from Facebook's business blog from last year, announcing a change, an update to the algorithm that was going to prioritize friends and family content. So that means basically that if you have a page, the net impact of that will likely be that your posts will be seen less. So that's a real issue, and it's a very specific issue relating to Facebook because it has this algorithm. So, one of there's two implications to that. The first one is that your content that you post for or organically has to be really good to cut through that algorithm. The second, though, is to recognize the benefits of then supplementing that really good organic content with paid advertising. And you really, you shouldn't write Facebook advertising off if you feel like, oh, I don't have big budgets, we don't have lots of money. You literally, with 25 quid, can run a really successful Facebook campaign. There are loads of different options in terms of targeting. You can target people by location, demographics, interest. Also, you can do things like custom audiences, lookalike audiences. There's lots more information about those online. We do a separate webinar about them for those who are interested. Really, really powerful tools to help you reach audiences for specific purposes, selling tickets, so on. And I like this quote from one of the organisers of Sonar Festival, where they're acknowledging that they don't even think of Facebook as a social network anymore. They think of it as a marketing platform, and they use it in that way. And I think that's really important because, again, it's about recognising, how does this platform work? How can I get the best out of it? Rather than just kind of posting stuff to a page and in the vain hope that somebody might like it or see it or do something as a result, buy a ticket or whatever. And the second thing that I mentioned about is recognizing where there might be differences across platforms in terms of the actual audience. So it can be quite easy to think about Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, maybe Pinterest as all having the same audience, but in reality they are slightly different. And again, it may not be that you need to have a kind of completely segmented approach to your social media channels, but just by taking a bit of time to think about whether there are differences in how you present content. And also, so if you look at something like Twitter, for example, you will find that just doing a really rough analysis of the followers to either a touring theatre company, an art gallery, a receiving theatre, all sorts of arts and culture organisations, what you tend to find now is that the people, this screenshot shows the keywords that appear in the Twitter bios of people following these accounts. And generally they tend to be other people in the industry, peers, other organizations. So Twitter has much more of a kind of professional feel to it than it does a kind of direct to audience feel. And of course, the implication of that is that your content and the way you approach it, therefore, needs to be slightly different than, for example, Facebook. So following on to that, but related to the point, is this idea of repositioning content. So rather than posting exactly the same thing to to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, even if it's the same basic story or message, it is a good idea generally to slightly tweak the presentation of it. And also to make the most of that platform. Again, a really quick example. If you think about Instagram, it's a really, really perfect platform for arts and culture. But, there is a bit more to it than people sometimes recognize. It's not just about posting the same picture probably that you would to Facebook. You have to make it as visually impactful as possible. You really need to hone a specific style. And I think, you can't underestimate the importance of that. It's completely understandable that when you're busy and rushed, you just end up posting the same thing to every platform. But in the long term, it won't pay off. And as I say, Instagram is a prime example of where a little bit of thought and attention into what those images look like and the overall theme that you're conveying is really important. And the final point I wanted to make was this thing about focus. And it might seem a bit of a throwaway comment, but I really can't emphasize this enough. It genuinely is better to focus and do one thing really, really well than to run accounts across several platforms in a kind of mediocre fashion. If you can only do one thing, probably make it Facebook and really focus on how you're going to get engagement up on that organic content. Supplement that with paid, really well targeted ads if possible. So I guess in summary, what I would say is you don't need to fear the apocalypse. Not this one anyway, not the attention apocalypse. You've just got to remind yourselves of the importance of viewing social content in a different way to traditional marketing content and respect each of those platforms' individual features. So thank you very much for listening to this webinar. If you have any questions or if you'd like to get in touch with us at all, or if you're interested in exploring any other webinars that we offer, please visit our website at theaudienceagency.org, or you can email me katie.moffat@theaudienceagency.org.